Okay, welcome to the overview of the co-living industry panel. I think all of our speakers are here, so I'm going to give you a very quick introduction and then I'll introduce our amazing panelists. We're here today because co-living is the word on everyone's lip in the real estate industry and has been for the past few months. With COVID crisis hitting the commercial real estate typologies, residential real estate is booming, and so naturally co-living is making its way in this multifamily BTR PRS world, where institutional investors, for those of you who don't know, purchase entire buildings designed for rental housing and then operate them directly or give the operational management to a specialized operator. So today we all agree that co-living is on the map. It is well identified by key real estate professionals and players. And so I'm very happy to be able to talk about what co-living is in relation to those other forms of housing and lodging with you all here today. We have Susan Tjarksen from Cushman and Wakefield. We have Philip Hilman from JLL. Andrew Purdon from CBRE, and Kostas Sotiropoulos, sorry for butchering your name, Kostas, from Greystar in the Netherlands. We are going to discuss key players, differentiation factors, risk profiles, and of course, anticipated evolutions for the future. But before we do all that, I want to give a chance to you all to introduce yourselves. So what about we start with you, Susan?
Great. First of all, let me say Costa Christos Anasti. Happy Easter. Greek Easter, Orthodox Easter was this past Sunday, so Christos Anasti.
Thank you, Susan.
I am Susan Tjarksen with Cushman & Wakefield. We have spent the last 4 years in this co-living space on a global basis. And we secure equity and debt for the actual PropCo part, as well as raise money for the GP and HoldCo parts of co-living operators globally. Right now we have 6 active deals in the US, we have 1 in Ireland, and tomorrow we're going to launch one in Australia. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Let's go in the order of the screen. So Andrew, it's up to you.
Hi everyone, great to see you all. My name's Andrew Purdon. I'm from CBRE, a similar firm to Susan's firm and Philip's firm. We are real estate advisors and brokers. I sit within the UK residential capital markets business in London. And to us, residential capital markets is split into 3 key parts. We've got build to rent, which you know all about. We've got student housing or PBSA, and now the new kid on the block, co-living. My role is head of co-living in the UK. So similarly to Susan, I help my clients raise funding, equity, and we have specialists within the business who do debt as well. So capital raising, both project specific and asset specific, and for platform level investments as well. It's great to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew. Kostas.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the Easter wishes, Susan. My name is Kostas. I'm investment director at Greystar. For those in the audience who do not know Greystar, we are a fully integrated real estate company doing investment, asset management, operation, and development of rental housing globally. We have over $35 billion assets under management, and we operate just under 700,000 apartments in the US, Europe, Asia Pacific, and South America. In terms of my role, I'm heading our investment team here in the Netherlands, where I've been based for the last year and a half. And before that, I was in our London office working on the development side of the business. So looking forward to an interesting discussion today and about discussing the entire value chain of co-living with you and the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Kostas, and thank you for being here with us, even though you just moved with a newborn, which is very impressive. Philip.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to have this opportunity to speak with you and to share with this experienced panel. I've been involved in the living sectors for some 30 or so years now. You can see from the slide, it says I'm chairman of Living Capital Markets at JLL. I'll be straight up front and say that the majority of my work has been in the student housing space. Was one of the first advisors active in that area in the early 90s. But what I love about the co-living area is that I see many similarities as we have developed co-living to become a recognized type of asset to what we experienced in the early 90s and early 2000 years when people really didn't get student housing. And so now I'm really enjoying working with investors and developers looking at co-living and also recognizing the influence co-living is having on other sectors, including PRS and student.
Thank you. So let's start by talking about just that. What is co-living? At Co-Liv, a few years ago now, we crowdsourced the definition of co-living, and the general answer or result was that it's a form of rental housing that is professionally managed, where people share resources and or spaces to access a better quality of life. Do each of you stand by that definition? And I'm going to ask a second question right away. How do you describe co-living to your friends and colleagues and clients when you talk about it? Susan, do you want to start?
Sure. So yes, I agree with that definition. I think I would add one aspect to what you said, in that this is a global situation where people are looking for connectivity and a sense of community in a more affordable, is what I would ask, lifestyle than is currently available in major urban environments. And I think that affordability aspect is hyper important.
Awesome. I think a few of you agreed with that affordability statement. Maybe Kostas, you can build upon that. I think we need to unmute Kostas, please.
Yes. So yes, definitely agree. Affordability is indeed at the top of the list. It's not the only thing that is driving the growth of the co-living sector, but it's definitely there. And the key driver for this is that there is an ever increasing urbanization, right? So over the past decades, we have more and more people moving into the cities, and we do not see that trend moving in any other direction. What is also happening in the last few years, and just building on that, is that we also see a change towards single housing occupancy. So you have a lot of people who want to move and live with themselves rather than living with their families, for example, or postpone the time of buying the first house. So and they don't find the options of these to move into such properties in city centers, because the cities were not built for that. So less stock available, less new supply coming into the market, and that increases the pricing. How can we fix that? We can fix that by designing purpose-built communities, which are designed in a cost-effective way with nice shared spaces, and where people can move in and live in more affordable communities.
So does that mean that co-living is necessarily purpose-built?
At least for Greystar, right, and our approach to it, it needs to be purpose-built because it needs to be designed in a way that is efficient and in a way that it can be managed efficiently, right? So what we find, for example, is that in our properties which are have the largest scale, where we have maybe more than 100 units in the same building, we manage to achieve economies of scale which make it much more efficient. It's much more difficult to achieve that retrospectively by buying existing buildings and refitting them out, and we find it's much more efficient if we do it from scratch, where we sit down with our architects and engineers from day one, and we design these buildings in a way that they can be operated most efficiently.
And Andrew, I would be interested to hear you weigh in here, because on the capital market side, if they're purpose-built and designed for this, their returns are much greater.
I think that's a great comment, Susan. Yeah, from a UK perspective, And back to your comment, Claire, about the institutional ownership of real estate. The likes of Greystar, they want certain scale of investment, certain type of property, which tends to be new build. And if operational efficiencies are linked in that world, in the student world and the BTR world, and now the co-living world, into the age of the building, the energy efficiency, the way that it runs. That's not to say that you can't run a beautiful co-living business from smaller scale properties. But I think it's important just to clarify that the types of investments we're talking about on this panel are the large scale institutionally owned buildings. The thing that really excites me about co-living is that it's the blurring of lines between hospitality and residential. That's what I really love about it. I think we've got some exciting players in the market, from build to rent and student, and we've seen an evolution of the service offering in those more established markets. But the fact that the likes of Greystar are in this space now is hugely encouraging. And ultimately what it means is better service and better lifestyle for the lucky residents of those buildings, in my opinion.
Philip, how do you see co-living fit in that general multifamily family?
Certainly recognize a lot of the comments and agree with the comments that have been made so far. In terms of how it fits into multifamily, multifamily is quite a broad school. And in the States, it perhaps is a slightly wider definition than it might be amongst some others in the UK and elsewhere. But what I think, for me, co-living, it's almost the epitome now of the move in 21st century city living towards a more affordable solution, but not just affordable, as we're saying, but also it's creating a community. And that community, as Andrew was just saying, this is about the blurring with hospitality. Couldn't agree more. It's not just about the bricks and mortar, although they're still pretty helpful to get the thing right and to make investors happy with the product. It's as much also about a way of living and a way of creating a community, the sort of community that people at quite different age points would be attracted to, not necessarily for the whole of their lives, but maybe possibly for key parts of their lives, where it can provide that community feel that I think is, the fear of loneliness is still a scourge of our age. I can tell you from the student accommodation sector experience, the thing parents are most scared of when their children go to university is them being lonely, not of failing, not of dropping out, is of being lonely and the consequences of that. And those people who've had a student accommodation experience, moving on, becoming older, looking for young, professional roles, and indeed further on in life as well, people very much want the chance to have the ability, the choice to share some aspects of their time together. Not all of it, you want your privacy, but definitely that's what's, for me, is epitomizing co-living. And I think the move from a little boutique type co-living assets, which we saw a lot of in California and elsewhere in the States, towards more institutional investment. I must admit, for me, it's that scalability, the fact that you can get institutions involved. That's what makes it a sector in its own right. You'll always still have some small boutique schemes, but these large scale, institutionally attractive opportunities give the sector the real opportunity to become a real force. And the debate that I always hear from some of my investment colleagues is, to what extent is co-living really going to do that? Is it going to become a real force, or is it just a sort of bit of flash in the pan? And I'm absolutely convinced it's here to stay, and it's actually influencing the other sectors very much.
Do
Claire, if
we
I
all
could
agree
add,
with that?
yeah, exactly. I would like to add just a point on what Philip said. I think he hit some really strong points there that I completely resonate with. I think at Greystar we identify mainly 4 key trends, right? And affordability is one, but there are other reasons why co-living is taking off. Affordability. Second is convenience. We live in a generation where people are very used to just pressing a button and having their problem solved, right? So we need to make sure there is technology in our buildings to enable them to achieve that, but also that we have on-house staff that help tenants experience this convenience. Third, we have the third trend we have identified is mental health and well-being. We need people to be to sense that they're part of a community. We are supposed to be very well connected, but still people complain about being isolated and about being lonely, right? How can we fix that in our communities? We can do that by creating nice shared spaces and organizing events in our communities so that they can gel together, get to know each other, and create an extended family. And fourth, the final trend is flexibility. As we have seen with COVID, the situations change all the time, especially the younger generation. They like to be able to switch jobs, move countries, study abroad, change neighborhoods to be closer to their new favorite bars. They're not going to take a 20-year mortgage at 22 years old and just stay in the same place. So we need to make sure as developers, owners, and operators that we are giving them the flexibility to have easy moves-ins and move-out, flexible terms in their lease agreements, the opportunity to move rooms within the buildings or even within other communities, within Greystar ideally, but even elsewhere if they want to move.
So that's great. And in everything you're saying, I hear, all of you, I mean, I hear, in order to make co-living a real recognized asset class for real estate, we need the right real estate model. And Andrew, you kind of touched upon that and the volume aspect of it. But we also need the right operator, right? The right branding, the right operational model, the right interior design, probably. Which leads me to one of my favorite questions. Who, for you, and according to you in your geographies, are the key players in the industry? And how do you think they differentiate from each other? Do they need to be different? And if so, how are they different?
We're seeing very much like the hotel industry, a stratification within the co-living operators and the buildings that they design. And that's part of a natural maturation process to move from very small buildings to now institutional sized buildings, and how those are designed. And it's going to be much like the like the hotel space, where they're going to go from Motel 6 all the way up to the Ritz-Carlton. And people are going to pick their lane and decide within that. To Costa's point, we say that there are 3 C's in co-living. You come for the cost, you stay for the convenience, meaning close to transportation, close to jobs, close to entertainment, and you stay for community, which bundles up connectivity, mental health, all of that stuff. But how these individual operators and owners are approaching that differs depending on where you are within the co-living space. Are you just offering a rooftop deck and a package room, or are you the X company and you have 38,000 square feet of Las Vegas style amenities in all of your buildings? And so we're seeing those identities start to very much define themselves and separate the players.
Within your opinion, markets that are as deep on each of those segments?
I think that they are, and again, it really depends on what and Greystar is a perfect example of this, what people's appetites are, meaning how much institutional capital wants to be in this space. In the US today, there are 12,000 beds in operation with 55,000 in the pipeline. Across Europe, there are only 6,000 beds by the major operators with 25,000 in the pipeline. And in Asia, where this has been around under, not called co-living, but this whole roommate situation, there are 60,000 beds in operation with 150,000 in the pipeline coming. And so when you look at this part of it about, Philip's statement that this is not a fad, this is here to stay, we certainly see that response across the capital markets, trying to catch up with the demand by financing supplies. But I think it also depends on where on the globe you are as to which part. Is it the bare bones, or is it the luxury model that is most effective for that, depending on where you are, what city you're in, and what those cultural norms are?
Thank you, Susan. I think you said one word that is interesting to me. It's cities. And so I think markets in co-living are only worth analyzing if you take the city scale, right? The country or the continent scale may not be that pertinent. So on that note, Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about cities in the UK and their key players, first movers, future leaders in co-living?
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. I mean, look, the obvious starting point in the UK for demand and raising capital is London. You know, we've got a big population of young people, existing renters. There's 367,000 existing renters in London between 18 to 40 who are single, and they earn more than £35,000 per annum. So that's a ready-made market for co-living. What we don't have right now is lots and lots of buildings. So we're behind Susan and the US. We've got planning consents coming through, but they're a bit slower than we hoped. There's an education process going on for sure with the local councils to explain to them what the purpose is of this new housing typology and why it's important. But what we've definitely seen is an increase in activity in the regional cities as well. So when I look back 12 months, really, we were only taking on work in London because we knew that was the most investable, the most liquid for us as advisors. But now we're working up and down the UK. We've got projects on in Manchester and Glasgow and Birmingham. And, you know, to answer your question, Claire, you know, where does this work? It's pretty simple for me. It's anywhere that has a population of good jobs, young renters, a dynamic city, and a sympathetic planning system. You know, we need to get planning consents to get these buildings built. So you put those all together, and that's kind of your ingredients to success. And it doesn't have to be London only. It definitely should be regional cities, and actually some special exceptions in the UK as well. We're seeing some less obvious places come forward with schemes now. I know we've got a global audience on this call, so you might not know the names, but some commuter towns into London, places like Guildford, Bath, which is a beautiful historical city, but has a quite expensive place to live. So you can create a business plan outside the major cities, but it's fair to say the investors want to start where they feel safest, and this is a new market at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think quite often it is those cities that have got a lot of young professionals that probably are targeted by many of the developers and operators at the moment. Can I just be controversial on one thing? I do think there's quite a few developers at the moment who are labeling their developments as co-living because it just helps a bit with their planning application. There is, in some cases, there is resistance to it from the planners, and one or two authorities remain to be convinced about the merits of co-living. They just see it as an excuse for smaller rooms and people squashed in together. And we had that with the mayor in London for a very long time. But there are others who I think, to be honest, are really looking at PRS schemes with just a touch of co-living. So just at the risk of being slightly controversial there. But as Susan was saying, there's all sorts of co-living. Go on, Andrew.
Well, it's a great comment. You know, developers often earn money by getting valuable planning consents and selling land. And I think what councils are alive to is who are actually the sponsors behind these developments that are going to operate them long term. And it's no coincidence that, you know, Costa's on the call, you know, Greystar comes in the door for a council, they'll get a different response to developer trader. And there's no coincidence that there are some very big planning consents now in Manchester, one with Vita, who are a very established living landlord and developer in student and build to rent, and another one with Downing, who are a very established student operator as well. So what they can demonstrate to the councils, when there is a level of nervousness there from the councils, they can demonstrate really high quality track record in operations and delivering against their promises for what this product should be. I think it's very difficult for developers without that operational flavor to actually sell the proposition in the same way. So you know, the operations are absolutely critical to success of planning, but also ultimately in investment performance.
It is interesting how, sorry, Susan, go on. Sorry.
I also think Costa weigh in here because Greystar is a big believer in blended buildings, that, you know, the operating systems today driven by technology are agnostic. They don't care if you stay an hour, a day, a week, a month, or a year. And so, you know, when Costa, when you look at what you're looking at in terms of planning, you're looking at blended buildings, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think you guys said it all. So I'll fly the Greystar flag, but it's really about the industry, right? So Andrew, indeed, if you are an operator, you have a completely different discussion with the municipalities and the planning authorities, because when you are sitting down with them and asking for a building permit, they know that you as a developer have a long-term vested interest in that site, and you're not just going to flip it after you get the building permit, right? And that really helps get more density out of the site and also have a more fruitful and long-term relationship with the planning authorities. And that's what we find in Graystar. We benefit by being a vertically integrated company covering the investment side, development side, as well as operational side. And this gives two main advantages, right? The key one is that by being present in the three segments of the value chain is that you're able to combine knowledge from all three of them. And you learn things from the operational side that you can then move into the design side. So we know from our operators how well the amenity spaces are being used, right? So we know which amenity spaces to provide in the next building and which not to provide. The second point, to Susan's point on blended communities, right? We cover the living space from student housing all the way to senior housing. So we would like to have tenants in our buildings for their entire lifetime, if it was possible, right? So, you know, they finish university, they come to our student housing communities, they become members of our group effectively, right? And then hopefully after they graduate, they can move to our co-living building next door. And then maybe they want to have a family or, you know, get married, then they move to our multifamily building, which is next door or maybe at the level above. And if they grow older, they may want to move to one of our senior adult community, as we call them in the States, or just senior housing, where they can have a happy retirement. And at the same time, at the ground floors of our buildings, we will have nice small entrepreneurs who operate, you know, a nice coffee shop or a nice restaurant, which effectively becomes part of the amenity and the life of the building. So, you know, it's important to have open access to our buildings, even for people who are not living there. For example, in our co-living community here in the Netherlands, we built, the first one was about 1,500 apartments that we developed. It was in an area which was not the nicest area in Amsterdam, and it was full of office buildings. And now everyone who lives and works in the surrounding area, they come and pick up their lunch and their coffee from one of our little restaurants that opened up there. So it's really about opening and inviting other people in your community, as well as creating a nice new place for people who come in and can enjoy different parts of their life from different age groups and different backgrounds.
On that planning point, if I may, I think actually it's hard to see how many of our cities can achieve what they want to in affordable housing without embracing co-living as one of the major potential solutions for a certain part of the population. Obviously not everybody. It's not suitable for everybody at all their stages in life necessarily, if any of them got family and the like. But I do think it's, you know, I've been really wanting to argue with some of the mayors who've been resisting co-living that they will never achieve the affordable housing requirements percentages they're looking for without giving a little bit more flex on co-living. Just the other point I was going to mention, I think this is one I'm sure Andrew and Costa will probably confirm. It is extraordinary how across the living space we've got a lot of the same investors who've been involved. First of all, they looked at they were probably involved in multifamily in the States, and then they've come and they've looked at student housing, they've looked at co-living, they've looked at PRS, and they're often involved in senior living as well. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about the living sectors at the moment is there's a very strong crossover of capital that really understands living and the importance of the operational piece. And I think that's what's changed in co-living. A few years ago in the UK, it was like you're having to sort of reinvent the wheel every time you wanted to talk co-living. Whereas at least now, people sort of are beginning to understand where you're getting to, and they're beginning to understand this blended comment that I think Susan made, you know, absolutely true. And Andrew mentioned blended living very much the way that, you know, I think a lot of the investors are seeing the opportunities in the living space.
And Philip, towards your point, hold on just a second, Claire. Philip, towards your point, to be controversial a little bit, the biggest stumbling block to getting these deals financed is, and please nobody on this call take this personally, is 60-year-old white men at investment committee. They don't understand it. They say their kids wouldn't live in it. You know, we're not talking about the top 5% of people on the globe. We're talking about the assistant store manager at Marks and Spencer's. We're talking about an assistant store manager at Target. We're talking about essential workers, teachers, firemen, nurse practitioners.
Single mothers.
Thank you, single mothers. These are people that run cities, and they get up every day and they go to work, and they're spending, for example, in New York City pre-COVID, they were spending 63% of their gross income on rent. That's not a sustainable model. And so how do you get these through investment committee? Part of the cost is having blended buildings, because the more it quacks like a duck, the more people understand it, the more it gets through committee and planning, Andrew. And the other part about this is that when you look at the sector, people don't understand the overwhelming demand. We estimate just in the United States that there is 899,000 people annually looking for roommate housing that aren't related to family. So this isn't families living together or you moving back home with your parents. This is 899,000 people annually who are living with roommates. Now that's college roommates, that's two-story walk-ups, you know, duplexes. That's not just institutionally managed product. In the US, we're estimating 25,000 co-living units by the year 2025 against 899,000 annually. I mean, if you don't believe the 899, divide it by 100. So now there's 25,000 units in 4 years with 89,000 annually looking for this kind of roommate living. And so it's how do you convince investment committee that this isn't a fad, that this is actually something that the younger generations are demanding. And let me say subtly before I shut up here, this is revolutionary in this space, that we are now looking at residential units as a consumer product, like you would look at a shirt, a car, the kind of handbag you carry. And that's being driven by these Gen Zs who are saying, if you don't make it ESG, if you don't have a sense of community, if I can't pay my rent by touching a button, I'm not living with you. And that is revolutionary in this space.
I think we should give you a round of applause, Susan. I
Susan.
completely agree with you. And I'm going to take that opportunity to offer you all to give a 1-second conclusion because we have a few questions. So I'm just going to spit out keywords that I think were important in what all of you said. Demand analysis just now, capital, and maybe the speed and value of capital depending on which operational model you're pursuing. The operational model you're pursuing, integrated versus asset light, the maturity of the market in relation to other real estate segments such as PBSA. What am I missing? Maybe key competitors or key players. We haven't really dropped names here, but please give us your perspective on where co-living is going and how it's going to look like in a few years down the line.
I have a go first, is that right?
Go.
For me, the most dramatic impact that co-living has had in the UK and Europe has been the impact on the living sectors generally, on PRS and on PBSA. I think it has really encouraged people to think not just about the physical building, but about the way it's operated. And it's also, and in particular, to think about creating communities. And I think the PRS, the private rental sector, is changing significantly, much more towards a more community-based environment. Likewise, student housing, there is so much more focus on the communal areas and on co-working opportunities, time to socialize and so on. You know, when I started in student, it was just boxes, basically. Here's your key, we'll have it back in a year's time. That has evolved so much. And I know, you know, that's probably music to the ears of Greystar, who, as they were looking at student housing when they entered the UK and Europe, were thinking this is a good launch pad for PRS and for co-living and the like. It's just extraordinary, the impact it's already had. And that's, for me, you know, it's been a huge success just by that criteria alone, but I think it's got a long way to go.
Andrew or Kostas, do you want to tell us 1 or 2 sentences to conclude while Guy comes up here to ask us the questions we have?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first if I may. We need to talk about weight of capital in the UK, the CBRE estimate is that there's about £40 billion worth of capital seeking access to UK residential stock. And to answer Susan's question, how do we present co-living to those investors? You have to communicate to them in the language they understand, which is about data, depth of demand, operational performance, benchmarking, capital rates, these sorts of things. And that's frankly what we do at CBRE, is we translate the co-living business plan into the language of the investor to secure that capital.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, maybe just to build on Andrew's closing remark on my end. I think my positive, feedback to the group is that from our discussions with our capital partners and investors, we see people are much more aware of co-living compared to what they were a couple of years ago. They are not scared of it. At least the product that we are developing as Greystar is very well received here in the Netherlands. Our co-living projects are selling out over a weekend, and we have queues of people in the waiting list to join in. So we don't see risk of lease-up risk for new developments. We see really steady cash flows. It's really an institutional asset, counter-cyclical, with almost no impact from COVID, at least in the Netherlands. So I think my positive closing remark is that at least on the investor side, we will see more and more capital wanted to flow into that industry. It's a little bit up to the planning authorities to help us provide the new pipeline that we need.
Thank you, Constance. Really appreciate all of you for coming here today and sharing. I'm going to share with you some questions from the audience. I'd like to pick up the latest one that's actually been just written down. And that is, how do the panel suggest that affordability, housing gap, that affordability and co-living schemes should be measured, and how do they think it can be achieved? Meaning, what does an affordable co-living scheme look like? I know that I personally also picked up this question because I know that affordability has been talked a lot around in the co-living industry, and so would love to hear how you would define and how you would measure that.
Can give a London perspective on that, if you like. So in the UK, we have to provide affordable housing as part of most forms of residential development. The London plan says that to get a consent in London, you need to provide 35% of the volume of the development as affordable. And otherwise you just don't get the consent unless you argue for a very long time through a viability process. What we're seeing in co-living, which is really, really interesting and hugely powerful from a social benefit perspective, is there are examples now in London where a certain percentage, and 35% is the norm, of the rooms or studios being offered to key workers in the borough at a discounted rent. So we need to distinguish between affordable with a small a, i.e. we can afford to live there as members of the public, versus affordable housing with a capital A, which is sort of social housing. So there's a way in co-living to provide both. So an accessible entry point to the product for people on normal salaries of sort of 30 to 40,000 pounds in London. But in addition to that, providing key worker housing for people who are doing wonderful things for our communities, the teachers, the firemen that you talked about, but also don't happen to earn quite so much money.
Maybe the only thing I would add would be scale. It really helps, scale really helps to make the product affordable. For us, at least 300 units in a project is what makes a product really affordable, because you can share your cost across 300 apartments, you can have nice common areas that are big enough, and you can have on-site staff to help the tenants have a great experience and build the community. And to do that, you need scale.
And
Can I just respond? Sorry,
Yes.
Claire, can I just respond to Kellyanne's question? She said, please don't say separate entrances. Segregation is not healthy. Totally agree. The product I'm talking about with the on-site discount market rent all comes through the same front door, same facilities, same experience, just different price points for people based on their ability to pay. So it's inclusive.
And I would say this, and I think that this is hyper important to all of this conversation this morning. People, meaning the residents who are attracted to co-living, are self-selecting this as a lifestyle choice. And so by doing that, they are inclusive by design and by choice. And so this whole idea of how do we blend buildings and have someone, you know, who's making 30,000 living very comfortably with someone making 150,000 is part of this whole process. And that's what's attracting these residents, among other things, to these co-living buildings.
I would
Susan,
also
do we
like-
track, sorry, it's going to be a question for you too. Do we track that diversity that you're talking about? And how do you, the big brokers of the world, are measuring affordability and inclusion in co-living?
Well, so part of it is, as Andrew said, and is about planning. You know, it's 20% across the US, more or less, has to be affordable by definition, and that's not subsidized housing or government programs. That means that it's people making 30 to 60% AMI, which is often referred to as the missing middle. Below 30%, you get government assistance. Over 60 to 100%, you know, you can't live in the Taj Mahal, but you can still live in a nice studio, so too bad for you. And so it's this missing part in the middle that part of this product, co-living product, is aimed at, that is essential for urban environments to operate every day. So how do you measure that? You track, when you build these, you track who is your resident, and what do they make, and what can you afford to build to give them to still make the returns that attract the capital.
I would like to see the planning authorities understand the sector better and not get obsessed with room sizes and focus more on the wider facilities. Look at the whole building. They sometimes come back and they say, but what if the operator changes and it becomes really just lots of little rooms? And of course, I know not everybody has little rooms and room sizes vary. But again and again, I hear planning authorities saying, no, it's just at the thin end of the wedge to getting high density housing, the slums of the future. And that is nonsense, absolute nonsense.
It's like judging an entire product on the simple characteristic, on a single characteristic.
Right, that's right.
Amazing conclusion, Kostas. I think our time is up. Maybe we can continue that conversation in the chat room if you have a little bit of spare time after our panel. And I'm going to hand it over to Guy now. Thank you so very much for this panel today.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Claire, so much for moderating. It's truly amazing to see that all of you are heavily involved in the scene and that you're taking the time to not only act, but also share what you're doing. So thank you again for joining. And
Pleasure.
yes, and